All right, I'll be breaking down all 32 NFL teams from a betting perspective before the 2024-25 season, discussing over-under team win totals, division and conference future bets, some season-long player props, and more. In this video, I'll be discussing the Cleveland Browns. There's two ways we can sum up the Browns last season. They won 11 games, which winning games is the most important stat, but they were one of the worst double-digit win teams since the year 2000. There's been 261 NFL teams who have won 10 or more games in a season. Out of those 261 teams, the Browns were the second worst team based on EPA per dropback. But another way to look at it is they managed to get 11 wins while using 5 different starting quarterbacks, losing stud running back Nick Chubb in week 2, and the injuries don't stop there. The Browns had the 4th worst injury luck in the league last season and played a top 5 toughest strength of schedule. A lot of Cleveland's wins were ugly. They won 6 games while having a negative EPA per dropback, which was the most in the league. Odds makers don't expect anything close to 11 wins this season, as they're lined at basically a 500 win percentage team with a win total of 8.5. It makes sense. Ton of question marks with this team. Deshaun Watson's health. How much does the injury from last season affect him? And not just him. Nick Chubb, we already know he's going to miss the start of the season. He'll be on the PUP list, physically unable to perform. So that means 4 games he's out at least. And he's been the primary option for Cleveland, and don't think you can realistically expect anything from him coming off such a gross injury, going on the age of 29 too. What he's going to look like when he finally hits the field, I don't know. You got offensive linemen that were forced on the IR last season. What do they look like coming off of injury? It's been an elite offensive line, but besides the injuries, big loss for the Browns team is the departure of offensive line coach Bill Callahan. He's the best O-line coach in the NFL. He left the Browns to help his son Brian Callahan, who's now the head coach of the Titans, and you can already see the impact he's had with the Titans offensive line. They've looked solid so far this preseason. I think the loss of Callahan will show itself on this O-line. That's always been a unit you can just expect to be sturdy. The Browns are one of the older teams in the league. They have 12 starters over the age of 30. Only the Niners have more starters over the age of 30. So injuries, again, this season could be an issue. This definitely isn't a team that's like rebuilding or anything. There's certainly a win-now urgency with the Browns. They didn't do much in the draft, but they did pull off that trade with wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, 25-year-old former first-rounder. Browns are hoping he'll step in to be that legit number 2 option. He's a solid after-the-catch receiver, finished ranked 12th among wide receivers last year in yak per reception, number 2 in missed tackles forced as well. Browns also added some depth at running back. Deontay Foreman, Naheem Hines, which was necessary because Nick Chubb won't be ready for the start of the season. You know, it's crazy to think Deshaun Watson only has 2 years left on this massive deal, and he's barely played. I'd imagine there's pressure on him now to perform. He's not going to have Joe Flacco to save him either. Browns let Flacco walk to the Colts and basically exchanged him for the cheaper, younger version of him, with Jameis Winston as now the backup. And just a reminder too, in case some people forgot, Winston did rank 2nd in the NFL in EPA per dropback just 3 seasons ago before he got hurt. With QB1 Watson having injuries start to mount up, I wouldn't be surprised if famous Jameis Winston does see the field for a few starts this season. This Browns roster has top 10 talent. Might be the best roster top to bottom with uncertainty at quarterback, which of course is the most important position. But this roster was good enough for Joe Flacco, and they have a head coach that's won Coach of the Year twice. He's known as probably the best plus EV decision maker. I really like the coaching staff. Head coach Stefanski, defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, and now they add offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey from the Bills. Still not sure who's going to call the plays, if it's Dorsey or Stefanski. Been meaning to find that out, but there's been 9 different starting quarterbacks during Stefanski's time at head coach, and the offense hasn't been that bad considering 9 different starters. I think Dorsey's going to be good for Deshaun Watson, maybe not as a play caller. I think I prefer Stefanski to be the play caller, but Ken Dorsey has a history of getting the most out of quarterbacks. Dorsey was the quarterback coach during Cam Newton's MVP Offensive Player of the Year season. His next stop in 2020 with Buffalo, Josh Allen had his best season. Now Dorsey's in Cleveland, and the big question is about Watson. Is he a legit starting quarterback now? He wasn't good last year in the limited time. He rated out in the bottom 8 of all quarterbacks, so there is a lot of room for improvement. And let's say Watson does improve to maybe a top 15 quarterback in the league. That would be the best quarterback the Browns have had in the Stefanski era. Watson might only have to be league average for this team to make a deep run. League average would be a big step up. This Browns offense finished ranked 28th in EPA per play last season, but the defense was obviously the true story, really carried the team under defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz. The Browns led the NFL in a ton of different advanced metrics: lowest EPA per play allowed, fewest points per drive allowed, third down success rate allowed. The Browns had one of the highest rated defenses in the history of the DVOA metric. What's crazy is it finished second last year behind the Ravens, so it goes to show how good the Ravens defense was. But the Browns and Ravens defensive units last season were in a league of their own. I mean, we're talking like historically good defenses. Now, even though the Browns defense does return pretty much everyone from last year, I do expect some regression from this defense. They benefited a lot from facing teams with either bad or just banged up quarterbacks. They got Joe Burrow in the season opener before he went out with the calf injury. They got Trevor Lawrence the week after his high ankle sprain. They got backup quarterbacks like Clayton Tune, Case Keenum, who we know aren't legit NFL starting quarterbacks. And then you couple this with the Browns playing a bunch of home games last year that were impacted by weather, rain, and wind, which helped limit opposing offenses who already had bad quarterbacks. The defense basically dominated bad offenses, but they allowed some big performances by other offenses. They held 5 different offenses to their worst or second worst games of the season, while allowing 4 teams to have their best offensive performances on the season, including the Houston Texans, who had their single best offensive performance all season in that wild card playoff round versus the Browns defense. What's interesting is, despite the Browns having a below average offense and a great defense, 11 of the Browns' 17 games went over the total and went over the closing total by an average margin of 6.25 points, which was the largest margin in the league. Now, I think overs could be the play this season in the Browns games, as the defense seems a little bit more overrated than underrated. But in general, I'm looking to lean more towards overs with some teams. That this new kicking rule will increase the average starting field position, which I think will increase scoring a little bit. Now, the Browns faced a top 5 toughest strength of schedule last season. It doesn't get much easier this season. Of course, being in the AFC North alone is one of the more physical and competitive divisions, but they play Kansas City, Dallas, Philly, and Miami outside the division, although they will play Miami in Cleveland in late December in a game that's likely to be freezing, which is an advantage, of course, for the Browns. I have the Browns playing the 7th toughest strength of schedule based on my ratings. 4 road games in the first 6 weeks, but a brutal 5-game stretch to end the season, which makes the early part that much more important. Week 13, they have a Monday night game in Denver, followed by another road game on a short week in Pittsburgh. Teams are just 44% against the spread in this spot since the 2000 season, and just 40% against the spread in this same spot if it's during the second half of the season, which is when this will be. The good news is they might have Chubb back when their schedule starts to get the toughest. If Cleveland had like a little bit easier of a strength of schedule, betting this over 8.5 wins would be much easier to pull the trigger. But then again, if their schedule was easier, their win total would probably be higher. Browns have a league average special teams unit, but a solid field goal kicker with Dustin Hopkins. I really like him. He went 8 for 8, kicking 50-plus yard field goals last season. Won me a couple big fantasy weeks last year. Kickers that can consistently make those 50-plus yarders are just absolute backbreakers for opposing defenses. Now, I have some strong opinions on teams. The Browns just aren't really one of those teams, but I'll be discussing all those strong opinions on teams coming up over the next week and a half before week 1 officially kicks off. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you can be alerted for my next team preview. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Next team preview coming up soon.